Now, let us start our session on literacy for global citizenship that practices sustainable peace. Before introducing the moderator, let me invite Ms. Heo Jung-wook, Chair of Jeju Institute for Lifelong Education and Scholarship, for the opening remarks. She worked as the head of Lifelong Education Center at Tamna University and CEO of Jeju International Global Center.
Nice to meet you.
It is supposed to be a monsoon season, but thankfully the monsoon season has been delayed this year. Thanks to the weather in Jeju, we were able to have many discussions together with the head of Institute for Lifelong Education and Scholarship. I'd like to express my special thanks to the moderator of the session, the chair of UNESCO EAC, Choi Eun-sil. In Jeju, we started our lifelong education program last year. Thanks to your support, I believe this program will be maintained for a long time. Last year, we had a topic of recovery of the elderly. And this year, we are focusing on digital literacy as well as literacy as a part of our project on our institute. Next year, we plan to focus on those in their middle age and vocational training for them as well. And also today we have Director David Atchorena from UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. And we also have Dr. Dae-jung Kang from National Institute for Lifelong Education. We have Professor Lee Ji-hye as well as Mr. Haribet Hin-chen and Professor Kim Min-ho too. I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to the audience. We are experiencing unprecedented crisis due to the pandemic. With the spread of the virus and social distancing, we had to change our lifestyle. And around the world, for the sake of sustainable life, we are highlighting the need of sustainability. As a part of the 16th Jeju-Forum this year, together with Jeju Special Self-Governing Province, our institute planned to have this session under the theme of Literacy for Global Citizenship. We are going to shed a light once again to the significance of literacy and the expandability of the concept. And we are going to stress the importance of lifelong education that enables sustainable prosperity. And beyond, as a member of certain groups, as global citizen, we need to reaffirm that we are the member of global community. For that, we need to make sure that everyone is trained based on global citizenship education. This citizenship determines the level of participation in the community. So in order to understand the concept of global citizenship leadership, I look forward to having many meaningful discussions together with you. I hope the moderator, the chair of UNESCO EAC, will help us to understand the concept and have meaningful discussion. And also we have President of the National Institute for Lifelong Education, Dr. Kang, and I had a meeting yesterday. And also, I'd like to express my special thanks to Mr. David Atchorena, who joined with us online. Also, I thank Professor E.G. He. And also, we have Mr. Harry Hin Chan from TVB International online. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude once again. I'm regrettable. It is regrettable that we were not able to invite you in person to Korea because of the pandemic. And also we have Professor Kim Min-ho. And I'd like to thank all the participants here with us. This opportunity was not even imaginable without your support. Thank you once again. If this forum is continued, I believe it's all thanks to your support and assistance. And I'm afraid we have many related members of the lifelong education and education centers in Korea. In order to make sure we pursue sustainable peace, we need to make the balance between economy and society. Taking this opportunity, I hope we can understand the importance of literacy as well as the citizenship literacy, which is the ability to translate and understand the meaning of information in our society. Once again, I'd like to express my deepest thanks to all of you who sent relentless support and affection. Thank you.
Thank you for your insightful speech. Let's give her a big round of hands again. And from now on, we'll get into the session in full swing. And let me introduce the moderator of the session, Mr. Choi Seop. Has been devoting himself for the lifelong education for his lifetime, and he has been the vice chairman of the UNESCO Committee for Lifelong Education. And under the participatory government, she has been the member of the presidential committee for the education, and also has been active as a consideration committee for the education, and also worked for the Iha Women's University on education innovation. So in the Korea Education Development Institute and the U.S. University of Missouri for Education Department has once included him as a member, and also he worked as a professor for Asia Pacific Research Institute on education, and he was once a representative for the Korea's Lifelong Education Center. So let's give her the microphone to the moderator of today's session, Ms. Choi Eun-sil. The floor is yours. Nice to meet you. I'm really delighted to participate in the 16th Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity 2021. So I'm really delighted to have a separate session on lifelong education, and this year marks the second year for us because we are having the same kind of sessions for 2 years in a row. And we also plan to have the session next year too. So in particular, the directors of the National Institute for Lifelong Education in the provincial levels are also with us today. I'm really honored to meet you all. And the topic for today is the global citizenship literacy. So when we talk about the global citizenship and the education on the global literacy, we actually don't really frequently connect the concept of the global citizenship with the education literacy. So this is This may be the first trial to shed light upon this connection between the literacy and global citizenship. And now the world is focusing on the concepts of the global literacy, and that's the topic for the conference, which is slated for autumn this year. So in this regard, I think it's really significant and timely to have this type of session today. First of all, keynote speech will be delivered by Dr. Dae-jun Kang, President of National Institute for Lifelong Education of Republic of Korea. He's also a professor for the Seoul National University, and he's an expert in pedagogy. And he also worked as a chief reporter for the culture beat at 중앙일보, one of the major newspaper company of Korea. And he had also devoted himself in the welfare sector. And the second presenter is Mr. David Atwarna, who is the director for the Unesco Institute for Lifelong Learning. As he's far away today, we will meet him virtually. And prior to joining the UNESCO, he had been working in the Education Ministry of France. He also worked for the financial department of St. Lucia. And at the UNESCO, he is leading the part for the international education and other various lifelong education related departments. He has doctoral diploma from Sorbonne University of Paris. And let's invite them for the keynote speeches. First of all, Dr. Dae-jun Kang will deliver his keynote speech. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I am Kang Dae-jun, the president of National Institute for Lifelong Education, Republic of Korea. And today, with the theme of renewing the concept of literacy for empowering a learning society, I will make a 20-minute presentation on the I will make a 20-minute presentation. Due to the pandemic of COVID-19, there is a huge threat posed upon the humanity of the world, and still we are suffering from the risk from the COVID-19. So social distancing, quarantine, and shutdown or lockdown have become everyday life. Under the circumstances, there are some embarrassing moments and accidents. And there has been some news articles on the situation, like a man arrested after refusing to wear a mask on the public transport. In that case, he would be arrested, and there has been some argument on whether he should be wearing facial mask or not. So this is not Korea only case, because there are a lot of the same cases taking place in the world. So this is just about the personal quarantine, but in many countries of the world, there has been a universal or dominating arguments on the reason we must wear facial mask, and people get to the streets to trigger a demonstration against the rules on wearing facial mask. It's derived from a reasonable question. However, there are some collective and unreasonable acts, like the demonstration, violent demonstration. And in India this year, spring, the national medical system is entirely collapsed. That's quite a tragedy. And due to the lack of the oxygen, they cannot conduct emergent medical services to the emergent patients. So even the funeral system could not be operated well. So some bodies were just set on fire at parking lots and other yards. What's more shocking was that doctors and scientists in India have warned against the practice of using cow poop in the belief, dung in the belief it will just ward off COVID-19. That was a misbelief, but they just gathered together for the prayer session, and it was reported by the news. They did not wear a face mask because it's a holy ceremony, so the cow dung will prevent them from getting infected with COVID-19. So this is all the fake news, and we are now wondering why this happened. Although people are evolved and innovated, the literacy and their understanding on the situation is still far behind the sufficiency. And what's the root cause of the situation is that the fake news shows the crisis of literacy. Under the pandemic situation, how much do we know about the pandemic situation? Recently, Korea suffered from SARS, MERS, and Ebola, which is actually a disease in Africa, and swine influenza and other new types of influenza had been quite widespread. And now we are faced with the pandemic of COVID-19. So this has not been precedented to the human beings. However, from animals, the virus was moved and transported and converted to human beings, and it triggers a lot of risks and threats to the human beings, and it also poses the threat to the survival of the human beings. So this is quite a risk, and this is also a issue that threatens the survival and preservation of the earth. And there are a lot of scholars who have been studying the pandemic, and this is quite simple but very intuitive. This type of pandemic, like coronavirus, are not coincidentally happen because these are very smart and clever viruses that can follow up the footprints of the people so that it could be widespread, and actually it's the human beings who plays a pivotal role in widespreading those type of pandemic, because a lot of most of the global population are just concentrated in the urban area, and that's quite a good condition for a respiratory virus to get widespread. So in summary, it is expected that the new type of virus will be distributed nationwide, and the Delta virus, which is the newly emerging virus, will have some influence over the pandemic situation, and that's causing concerns over the medical and health safety of the people. Actually, human beings have sustainably destroying the environment, and on the process the viruses has been widespread. So although the pandemic has a greater influence over the human beings, people have been more focused on their lives rather than the environment or circumstances where other beings or creatures could live together. So that's the reason that people are still obsessed that by just maintaining the social distancing, the pandemic will be gone. So now is the time to think in a new way to maintain and sustain the earth and the environment. It should never it should go beyond a void slogans, because we have to make real action, and we project that after the end of COVID virus, the world would be totally different. So we are the biggest threat to us, That's my idea, and human beings are the biggest obstacle or threat to the survival of the earth. This is the reason that we must act differently from now. So in this era of COVID pandemic, we have to think about the way we live. And the question like this will give us insights for living in this new normal era. So, in order to become a citizen in true meaning, we have to we have to adopt the concept of the lifelong education so that everybody will be equipped with literacy. However, being equipped with literacy must be defined really well prior to we make any actions regarding this. So under the circumstances of pandemic, we realize the importance of literacy. Then we have to make a definition on the literacy, and we have to discover tasks for increasing or strengthening the literacy. So what's the role of the education workers who are working for lifelong education? How can we make them to learn about the better life and how to live a better life? So in this globalized world, we are living in a interconnected world. So the value that are important, universally important for all of us, we have to pursue the value. And when we talk about us or we, it is not only human beings but also animals who just contaminated us with the virus and the ecosystem or nature, because we must live harmoniously with nature or the ecosystem. This is a topic that a lot of philosophers or those who have expertise in human studies are focused on. So Torres and Bossio, U.S. philosophers, make studies about the globalized community, and they said the earth is the only home to us. And secondly, all the people are equal, and in this diversified world, we must live in a democratic way. And the word peace is an intangible cultural asset that goes along with the intangible value. This points out the biggest lesson to all of us. And according to the Cambridge Dictionary, literary refers to the ability to read and write. This is quite simple definition. And if you look at the sentence in the dictionary, at 62%, India's adult literacy rate is a reminder of the country's status as a developing nation. And second definition of the word literacy is that this is the knowledge of a particular subject or a particular type of knowledge. So there will be subcategories of literacy such as health literacy, security literacy, etc. In Korea, a survey on literacy was conducted recently, and according to the EBS News, at the beginning of this year, 72.6% of the respondents said they have difficulties in expressing their thoughts and reading a text, and the score was 54 out of 100. And I actually got about 70 because the questions are not really easy. And I believe that about 70% of the Korean adults are not fully capable of expressing their thoughts and reading the text. So, in this field of adult education or lifelong education, literacy takes the top priority because it is regarded as a very important topic. And according to the survey conducted by my institution, about 30% said there are no particular difficulties in understanding the meaning of the text or expressing their own ideas. And when you think about the future, we have to shed a light upon the literacy from this perspective. And after education, we just thought about ourselves and our practices on literacy education, because in the industrialization era, they just witnessed the limits in the industrialization, and they tried to find the new potential for the next generation. And then they just suggested that the education must suggest the way to live in the unprecedented era for the next generation, our offsprings. Actually, it is almost practically impossible to make them the 100% answer. So they, as an alternative, suggested that the futurists and other scholars who have expertise in projecting the future must be ready to educate the offspring. And they said what's at the core of the future education is imagination, because by using imagination, they can project the future. And while I'm in the class with the undergraduate students, we said our life is from the womb of mother and to the tomb in the grave. And this is from the born to the death of a person. And in the middle of our life, we have to have a period of education. And as a learner and as a teacher, they must think about their own role and purpose of the education. And at the Unesco, by the end of this year, they will launch a new report on the Future Literacy Network. So back in 1996, there was a previous report, and this year there will be the third edition of the report. And the gist of the report is that the future would be multiple, and we have to be equipped with the literacy to understand the future. And when we think about a different future, it's quite an irony, because future is not existing now. That's the meaning of future. Then how can we project and experience future at present? However, future is not existing, but it has a certain degree of influence of our present life. Then we must be active in projecting the future. So according to the UNESCO report on the future's literacy, which is the name of the lab that had been operated globally, and at the lab, a methodology was proposed. So by utilizing expectation, we have to be prepared for the future, and we must build the future. And the future is really close to us. And back in 2015, the UNESCO announced the Sustainable Development Goals. And they announced 17 subcategories for the SDGs. And regarding 7 items, they discovered the detailed tasks to get prepared for those type of future. And Korea is making efforts to achieve the access to a quality education. And we believe that that would be possible through lifelong education. And the Learning Society was the suggestion in the report, which was published in 1970s. And at that time, the Learning Society must be futuristic, as they mentioned. So the lifelong education system should be firmly rooted in every corner of the society. That was the gist of the report that was published in the 1960s, 70s. And the next version of the Learning Society report was more focused on the learning society, which is consumption oriented. And at that time, Korea was very progressive in adopting those concepts. And along with other social policies, the range and scope of the lifelong education was ever broadened. And how to further develop the learning society is up to the role of the government, because the government must be really proactive in building our future by education. Actually, I just went briefly over the theme of literacy education and lifelong education based on how to design the future actively. So, in the field of lifelong education, we are just considering about the new ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kwang Tae-ju, for your keynote speech. He made a comparison before the pandemic and after pandemic. From a perspective to prepare post-corona era, we need to deal with the post-corona COVID era based on education. The earth is sick, and it is imaginable where there's no earth for us any longer. Under these circumstances, with the concept of literacy, we need to tackle the crisis together. And I think he provided quite great wisdom regarding that. As introduced already, let me introduce Director David Atuchuarena from UIL. Let's meet him on a video clip. He will explain how we can make the world where literacy is achievable.
Greetings from the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in Hamburg, Germany. I wish to thank the organizers for their invitation. It is an honor for me to participate in this prestigious event. It is also an opportunity to bring a message from UNESCO and to reiterate the importance of education for peace, sustainable development, and human rights. The world is experiencing a number of trends, creating new challenges as well as opportunities. Over the past 3 decades, global poverty levels have fallen, but global inequalities have grown. Educational expansion has created opportunities for many, but also left vast numbers with low-quality learning or with no access at all. Economic growth has lifted more people out of poverty than ever before. Yet, climate change and environmental degradation have accelerated and threatened biodiversity and the survival of humanity. In many parts of the world, an increasing number of people are actively engaged in their communities and in public life, yet government crises and the weakening of democratic institutions currently seen in many parts of the world create uncertainty regarding democracy and its future. We are more closely connected than ever, yet social tensions and mistrusts are rising. Access to information is booming thanks to internet and digital media, but fake news are expanding. In such context, lifelong learning constitutes a powerful response to ensure inclusive, peaceful, and sustainable societies. Lifelong learning is the philosophy, conceptual framework, and organizing principle of all forms of education based on inclusive, humanistic, and democratic values. It contributes to building democratic, just, inclusive, and sustainable societies. Lifelong learning is key to realizing the Sustainable Development Goals and it is central to cope with the rapid changes in our societies and planet. Literacy is at the core of the lifelong learning agenda and an integral part of the right to education. Global citizenship education is a key enabler of SDG 4.7 and to the realization of the 2030 agenda. The three areas of sustainable development, economic growth, social inclusion, and environmental protection can only be developed in the framework of peace and partnership. UNESCO flagship reports contributed to promote the concept and vision of lifelong learning and its role for a better future. Learning to Be, the World of Education Today and Tomorrow in 1972, stressed that lifelong education is the cornerstone of a learning society and suggested that all countries should take lifelong education as the basic principle of education reform and development. In 1996, Learning, the Treasure Within, the so-called Delors Report, emphasized that lifelong learning is the key to ensure social cohesion in the context of rapid globalization. It presented the four pillars of education in the 21st century: learning to know, learning to do, learning to live together, and learning to be. But since then, the environmental crisis, and in particular the climate crisis, has created new challenges for the world. How to redefine humanity in its relationship with nature. More recently, with the developments in technology, it is also about how humans interact with artificial intelligence and how we relate ethically and safely to technology. UNESCO is currently working on a recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence. It is against this backdrop that UNESCO Director General convened an international commission in 2019 to rethink education in a world of increasing opportunities, but also inequalities and uncertainty, and to reimagine how education can shape the future of humanity and the planet. The report of this commission will be entitled Futures of Education, Learning to Become. It will be published in November 2021 and will serve as an agenda for global debate, policy dialogue for action until 2050, so beyond the time frame of the SDGs. Even before the COVID pandemic, more than 250 million children and young people were out of school. More than 50% of those who are in school do not achieve the minimum levels of literacy and numeracy. Despite the steady rise in literacy rates over the past 50 years, there are still 773 million illiterate adults around the world. Most of them are women. These numbers, compiled by the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, are a strong reminder of the work ahead to meet the SDGs, especially SDG 4 and Target 4.6, to ensure that all youth and most adults achieve literacy and numeracy by 2030. As already mentioned, literacy is the foundation of lifelong learning and an integral part of the right to education. As defined by the 2015 UNESCO recommendation on adult learning and education, literacy involves a continuum of learning and proficiency levels, which allows citizens to engage in lifelong learning and participate fully in community, workplace, and wider society. It includes the ability to read and write, as well as the ability to solve problems in an increasingly technological and information-rich environment. Literacy is an essential means of building people's knowledge, skills, and competencies to cope with the evolving challenges and complexities of life, culture, economy, and society. UNESCO defines global citizenship as a sense of humanity, a sense of belonging to a global community. It emphasizes political, economic, social, and cultural interdependency between the local, the national, and the global. The overall goal of global citizenship education is to empower learners to engage and assume active roles, both locally and globally, to face and resolve challenges, and ultimately to become proactive contributors to a more just, peaceful, tolerant, inclusive, secure, and sustainable world. As people become more literate, they become able to engage in different ways with the world, beyond their own village, community, or country. UAL and the UNESCO Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding, APCEU, in Seoul, recently published a publication on global citizenship education in adult learning and education. The report shows a positive correlation between literacy learning and global citizenship education outcomes. It shows evidence that participation in literacy programs improves self-esteem, empowerment, creativity, and also critical thinking. Digital technology plays a crucial role in shaping the future of education. Accessing information takes now place largely by using the internet and digital devices and applications. The role of ICTs must be considered in relation to their potential, but also considering threats and risks. Individuals must learn to be critical users of the digital world. During the pandemic, the closure of education institutions promoted the use of technology for teaching and learning. This trend is there to stay. It is therefore important to instill or reinforce competences that enable people to feel confident in a digital environment. Today, approximately half of the world population, some 3.6 billion people, still lack an internet connection. But even among those who have access, many lack the knowledge to access the digital world. Bridging the digital divide by providing connectivity and access to internet and online courses constitutes a major challenge for the years ahead. Teaching is a job. Good teaching is an art. Enhancing teaching quality requires investing in pre-service training, but also supporting teachers as lifelong learners throughout their career. Global citizenship needs to be fully integrated in teacher training curricula and learning materials. Raising awareness and encouraging learners to critically analyze, understand, and transform their realities is part of transforming lifelong learning. Human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, active citizenship, and cultural diversity have long been at the center of emancipatory literacy programs. The current pandemic showed us that not all can be replaced by the digital world. Teachers from early childhood through adult education are essential to learning as a social practice. Leveraging the potential of lifelong learning requires recognizing the importance of the teaching profession and increased attention to teacher education and professional development. While a lot of progress has been made to study and monitor the status of school education globally, much less information is available on adult education. The UNESCO Global Reports on Adult Learning and Education, the so-called GREL reports, constitute an attempt to bridge this gap by offering some evidence on adult education provision and its outcomes on individuals, communities, and societies. In 2016, GREL 3 showed that in 2/3 of the responding countries, literacy programs helped develop democratic values, peaceful coexistence, and community solidarity. Almost 3/4 of the countries responded that literacy programs make a large contribution to active citizenship and community participation. Further on, in 2019, GREL 4 showed that 57 of countries reported quality improvement in literacy and continuing education programs. In the context of growing migration, GREL 4 also showed that the lack of literacy and language courses for migrants and refugees constitute a major obstacle to their socioeconomic integration. In addition, grade 4 revealed that 36% of countries had no provision at all in citizenship education. Let me conclude by summarizing a few key messages. First of all, literacy is the foundation of lifelong learning and global citizenship education. Promoting human rights should be the starting point of all literacy programs. Learning, caring, and engaging should be at the core of global citizenship education. Literacy and global citizenship education require a lifelong learning perspective, starting with early childhood education and continuing through all levels of education into adulthood, including both formal and informal approaches. Finally, and this is why this event is so important and meaningful, international dialogue and international cooperation are key to further promote global citizenship in a lifelong learning perspective. I thank you for your attention.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you. It was the presentation by Mr. David Attuarena, Director of Unesco Institute for Lifelong Learning. I think his presentation was in line with the presentation done by President Kang Dae-jung. Mr. Kang was focusing on the future literacy, and David Attuarena focused on a variety of reports published by UNESCO regarding literacy and the importance of global citizenship for the participation in the global community. And he also highlighted the importance of lifelong education for the sake of global citizenship education. And for this matter, the international community should make global cooperation, and not only for the teachers, but also the educators in kindergarten and global lifelong educator also need to be trained on the same manner. UNESCO published a great report on the global trend on the adult education, and the fourth report was published last year in Korean. Still, the majority of the subject nations, we have more than 150 member countries in UNESCO, but the majority of the countries are not fully satisfied with the literacy. And most of the countries are still struggling with a combat to the anti-literacy. From the perspective for lifelong education, I think it was pretty meaningful to discuss the global citizenship and literacy education. Now, I'd like to open it up for a panel discussion. We don't have much time for discussion, so I'm afraid we are not able to make in-depth discussion. But if time allows, we'd like to take a couple of questions from the floor as well. First, I'd like to invite our panelist, Dr. Heribert Hin-chen. He is the former director from DVB International in Germany. He is an honorary Secretary General for the DVB International, and he is also providing consulting to a variety of education-related institutions. He's also focusing on Asian area regarding lifelong education and citizenship education. Allow me to introduce Mr. Heribert Hin-chen.
This is a presentation on literacy for global citizenship that practices sustainable peace and is a contribution to the 16th Jeju Forum for Peace and Prosperity. I will be discussing lifelong literacy, as we increasingly get an understanding that literacy is a continuum, not a dichotomy of either being literate or illiterate. And I discuss it as a human right to lifelong learning, which puts a strong emphasis on adults, as it is the largest group in society, the longest time in life, and the field is called Adult Education and Learning, ALE. Literacy is a key component of ALE and of lifelong learning, and community learning centers are hubs for ALE and LLL. Some biographical notes. I've been involved in the peace movement from my early school and student years. It was the time of the Indochina War, and we distributed leaflets against the war in front of our church and the school. In the 80s, I was involved in literacy research in Sierra Leone. I was director of DVV International when we had the breakdown of the wall between the East and the West in Germany, in Europe, and globally. I was in a plane on September 9/11, 2001, on the way to Azerbaijan. And from 2009 to 2015, I was director of the regional office in Laos, which is still the most heavily bombed country on earth. My contacts with Korea hail back to the 1980s with first visits. Professor Yonggon Wang took me to the demilitarized zone and involved me in a peace discourse. In 2000, I visited the royal tomb of King Sejong and got an understanding of Hangul and the Korean alphabet. My host was Professor Kim Shin-il. And then in 2013, I joined the technical consultation on global citizenship education in Seoul. 2015, the World Education Forum in Incheon, the Confintea midterm review in Suwon, Busan. Then in 2017, I came to Jeju for the Lifelong Learning Education Officials International Seminar on Education and Sustainable Development. 2018, the World Forum for Lifelong Learning in Korea. I visited the Unification Tower in Udusan. My host was Professor Choi Eun-chil. And then I was involved in exchange visits between Korean, Central Asian, and German colleagues. And just recently, in 2021, I joined the Korean-German International Webinar on Peaceful Unification. In the process, I got involved in a number of important publications which look at communities learning and look at community learning centers, all with the perspective of what is the contribution actually of adult education to active, global, and participatory citizenship. The most recent one was on the public financing of popular ALE. And fortunately, as one of the 14 case studies, we had Korea being involved. And it is an understanding that this popular adult learning and education contributes heavily to active and global citizenship. UNESCO has been a guiding instrument in the process for me to understand global citizenship education, and it is especially the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable Development and the Asia Pacific Center of Education for International Understanding based in Seoul, who helped me in getting an understanding which I could use for my practice in adult learning and education. A very interesting guide is Understanding GCED in Asia Pacific and how to taking it local. And there are some conceptual dimensions of global citizenship education, so that we have to look into the cognitive aspects to acquire the knowledge, the understanding, and the critical thinking. We have to respect the socio-emotional, have a sense of belonging to a common humanity, and the behavioral, to act effectively and responsibility at local, national, and global levels for a more peaceful and sustainable world. The technical consultation on GCED in Seoul and the Forum on Global Citizenship in Bangkok 2013 helped a lot in shaping an understanding of what global citizenship is in praxis. It discussed curricular approaches using ICT, sports and arts-based approaches, community-based approaches. It looked into teacher training and into youth-led initiatives, a very interesting document even today. The UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning is strong with looking into literacy, and they published a very interesting case study book of 25 cases from Africa, Arab states, Asia, Pacific, Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean, so actually a global study. And they are looking into transforming our world into literacy for sustainable development. The background for all of this are the UNESCO education reports. The 1972 one by Fowler on learning to be, the 1995 by Law, learning the treasure within, and currently we are on the new education report on the futures of education. All of these reports have a lifelong learning perspective, and they carry dimensions of literacy and peace. Interesting for you to look at is the UIL contribution to the futures of education, and as well from a civil society perspective, that of the International Council for Adult Education. Now let us turn to Confintea. Confintea are the international conferences on adult education, and the last one was in 2009 in Belém, and the Belém Framework for Action looked at the importance of literacy, and it covers 5 areas in respect to policy, governance, financing, participation, and quality. And in there, it is recognized that ALE is a significant component of lifelong learning, and that the creation of multi-purpose community learning spaces and centers for ALE is a prerequisite. Literacy is an indispensable foundation that is important for all stages of the learning continuum. GRAIL is the global report on adult learning and education, and it is monitoring the process ever since the Belém framework. The one which is currently in the making is Active and Global Citizenship, and it will come out next year. I participated in the World Education Forum in Incheon, and it was a heated debate to come up finally with an overarching goal, which is ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And it has as one of the targets that all youth and a substantial proportion of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy and numeracy. And that by 2030, that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development through education for human rights, gender equality, and global citizenship. And as a means of implementation, community learning centers and spaces should be strengthened as part of the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals 1 to 17, and 4 is the quality of education, and 16 is peace and justice. It was brought together, the Belém framework and the Sustainable Development Goals, in the recommendation on adult learning and education in 2015, where it's written that adult learning and education includes education and learning opportunities for active citizenship, variously known as community, popular, or liberal education. We are now moving fast towards Confintea 7, which will be on adult learning and education and the 2030 agenda. We had the midterm review in Suwon, Ulsan. 2020, we had the country reports. We are now in the period of sub-regional meetings and regional conferences. And 2022, we are all meeting up in Morocco for Confintea 7. We also at a 5 years campaign, which the International Council for Adult Education and 15 partners have initiated globally. We are ALE, and that unites organizations to make adult learning and education seen, understood, and valued globally to strengthen all our efforts in literacy and active as well as global citizenship. If you want to have more of my experiences, please have a look at a publication which we did, and you have the link down there. Herzlichen Dank. Thank you. Kamsahamnida. I wish you well with the further proceedings of the Jeju meeting this year. Hope to see you again soon. Thank you so much again.
네.
Thank you for your insightful presentation, Dr. Heribert Shinjen, who is really actively participating in the International Organization of Lifelong Education, DVV in English. So it has been almost 40 years since he decided to devote himself into the lifelong education industry, both in Korea and Germany. Let's invite Professor Hwang Jong-gon and his colleagues of Dr. Hwang Jong-gon and Kim Shin-il, the former Vice Prime Minister of Korea. Dr. Shinjen has been making his best efforts for giving a boost to the lifelong education sector of Korea. And back in 1945, the meeting has been kicked off for the first time in Denmark, and the midterm session was held in Suwon, Ulsan area of Korea, and next year the session will be held in Morocco. So that will be a huge international conference on global citizenship, literacy, and lifelong education. So the biggest topic for the UNESCO lifelong education is that no one should be left behind. The spirit advocates the importance of the literacy, and with this, it is deplorable to see that some are still cannot read. So the literacy education is really important, and not just for the simple meaning of reading and writing. Literacy will now is a new symbol for understanding the international trend to live the future. And Professor Shin is now talking about innovative literacy, which is highlighting the reason of existence. And now let me invite the second panel for the panel discussion. Dr. Lee Ji-hye from Hanyum University.
She is the editor-in-chief of Journal of Korean Society for Lifelong Education. And also, she published a number. She is also working for a publisher in the education field. Let me invite the second panelist, Professor Lee Ji-hye.
네, 안녕하세요.
Hello, everyone. It was quite impressive. I was quite impressed by the presentations and the panel discussion as well. Last year, UNESCO published a short report. It mentioned that a forgotten education, which is an education for adults. So in the post-pandemic era, we need to put a lot of investment in the recovery of education for the youth. So for the time being, it is highly likely for the adult education will be forgotten. Nonetheless, having this opportunity to discuss on the importance of adult learning is quite meaningful. The presenters, as well as Dr. Hin Chen, made shared meaningful insights on the adult learning and literacy education, but the message has been reiterated over and over for the last decade. As a researcher in the field of literacy education, I feel a sense of urgency. I'm afraid our effort for literacy improvement is staying on the same spot without dramatic or tangible improvement. Of course, I am not sharing any brand new idea and nothing different from the presentations. However, I'd like to make a little bit of addition to the presentations. First of all, where to focus regarding the content of literacy education would be a new topic after the pandemic. I think the widening gap in society will be more controversial in the future, but at the same time, we have gone through global crisis and global changes. But in order to tackle these issues, we need to encourage the participation in the community. And at the same time, we need to put focus on literacy, in particular digital literacy. So there are a lot of new terms in the digital environment. So these concepts could be spread to multiple areas, and this spread could be continued going forward because there are countless numbers of areas. And for this matter, this research on digital media literacy, this person conducted a study on the current status of digital media literacy, and it suggests a more rounded humanistic concept that is perhaps closer to the German notion. So we need to make an approach to the literacy education by making students capable of asking questions, because literacy goes beyond just writing and reading. And writing is connected to raising their own voices, expressing oneself. So he suggests that educators around the world should put an emphasis on writing as a means of self-expression. And as the education landscape spreads, the core target of literacy education can be possibly isolated. In that regard, we need to prioritize target of the literacy education when we design the education framework in the first place. Against this backdrop, this Kimberly Crenshaw's research I found this research quite impressive. We can adapt this one to our situation. In the case of Black women, they are faced with that double discrimination because they are Black as well as women. So we can consider different backgrounds when it comes to literacy education, but there are some duplicated area like the aged and female and poverty. Depending on the combination of the conditions, we can make a variety of adoptions of literacy education. So on the one hand, we need to expand the landscape for literacy education, but at the same time, we need to pinpoint its specific group. Third, how we teach and how we learn. This is continuous challenge for the educational sector. You must be familiar with border crossing. Many of us are locked with our own site. So we need to move out of this island of thought, and literacy education could be a key to escaping from such island of thought. I think this one should be reflected in the process of literacy education design. And also, we can refer to context hypothesis. There are many different groups, but these groups meet and interact with each other over the course. They can think out of the box. And this, I believe, corresponds to the main topic, which is praxis. So taking this example, we can also think about social living lab. Recently, I saw one social living lab which focuses on media technology education. And parents, teachers, as well as students are participating in the social living lab to have discussion and make action plans together. I believe we need to encourage this kind of activities in the sector of literacy education. Fourth, we keep mentioning global citizen education, but underlying problem is who will teach the citizenship. So many issues in a nation is addressed under the leadership of the government. However, I question if this is the right direction for the government to lead the citizenship, because citizenship is all about participation of citizens, but the government leadership may not be relevant in this area. So we need to make a proper coordination between governance and other different concepts. So this kind of discussion can contribute to the next level of design. Thank you for your insight sharing. She is an expert in literacy education, and it was impressive that we need to think out of the box and we need to encourage the engagement of the citizen, making sure that we are not locked in the trap of institution. In the interest of time, the last panelist, Professor Minho Kim, will not have much time. He served as a full-time expert on the Presidential Advisory Committee, and also I'm afraid I have to give him only 5 minutes. I'm afraid, and it is quite regrettable that we are not able to take any questions from the floor either. 5 minutes, please.
Okay, I will try to get faster than usual because of the given time. And the previous panels talked about the future's literacy education and the critical approach on the literacy education. So they were really helpful in understanding the importance of literacy. And due to the environmental issues and the unfairness issues that the human beings are suffering from, could be mitigated by the literacy education, according to their remarks. And that was quite impressive. And as a professor for the education sector, I realized that lifelong education or adult education can be done within the boundary of the school. And I would like to ask you 2 questions, and I would like to present 3 opinions about the theme. And first question would go to David. So you mentioned about the 3 elements in the global citizenship education: caring, engaging, and other thing. And regarding the learning and participation, I think that will be really helpful in understanding how to live as a global citizen. But I would like to know more about the concept of caring in this context. And to Professor Kang, Dr. Kang, I thought during your presentation that literacy is escaping from illiteracy, and the picture of the Indians, I believe that literacy education means transporting from transition from myth to the reasonable thinking. So is that something like newly arranging our paradigm or a framework? And at the same time, I would like to suggest 3 opinions regarding the presentations. Firstly, in the global citizens education, because of the term of global, I feel like the importance of local efforts seem to be quite weak because of the term global. However, I believe that the local life, local residence life, marks the beginning point of the global citizenship education. And these days, Jeju Island has the large agenda of the establishing of the new airport terminal. And according to the survey on the idea of the residents, most of them opposed on the establishment of a new airport terminal. And I think the voices from the local residents are not fully reflected in the policy making. So in this regard, what's the meaning and significance of the global citizens education? If you think about the sustainable future, then the education on global citizenship must be started from the life of the local residents. And secondly, the global citizen education should be turned into action. And in order to do that, sustainable development goal is not sufficient. People mentioned about the one and only Earth. And in order to live like an American, 2 or 3 more Earths would be needed. So in order to achieve the sustainable lifestyle, we have to consider the best option, because in order to achieve the sustainable development, we must live in a sustainable way. And the other thing is that when we are trying to realize this, we need to restore the local language. In Jeju, there is a local dialect term, 조냥, which means a saving life. And the other dialects, which means sunurum, which means a collaborative labor. These concepts are generated from the Jeju local life, but these terms could be applied to build the groundwork for global citizenship education. In this regard, I would like to highlight that the global citizenship education must be started from the local residents' lives. By doing so, we can create a ecosystem or creatures community that everybody can harmoniously live together. Thank you. Thank you for your remarks. Thank you for your remarks on behalf of the Jeju Island residents. Thank you for the last panel, and thank you for being punctual. And as he asked, actually the session is broadcasted online, so we have to be very punctual and only 2 minutes left. And I'm so sorry that we don't have enough time for answer. Anyway, why caring matters in global citizens education? That was the question to David, and I believe that symbolizes the altruism, which means taking care of others, and that lays the groundwork for the spirit of community. That's the reason I believe. And this marks the end of the session. There has been a lot of experts and renowned celebrities in the field attending today's session from Incheon Lifelong Education Center and other administrative units, Lifelong Education Center. And due to the constraints and time, we cannot hear from you. So that marks the end of the session. And a lot of audience from the YouTube leave questions now, and later I will give you the sincere answer. Please understand. So literacy, global citizenship would be the answer. And we must think from the lifelong education perspective. And border crossing would make you to generate a new way of thinking. And we have to endlessly expand the scope of lifelong education. The definition of literacy is being expanded to include peace literacy, health literacy, human literacy, well-being literacy. So this is such a broad concept. So with today's event, we will have a time to discover and explore the concept of new leap to open the era of prosperity that fits today's theme on for peace and prosperity. We have to think about the literacy education so that the inclusive society would be realized. So this is actually what the Unesco highlights. When just one is left behind the benefit of education, then no one's educated. That means that no one should left behind, because the world is a one place, one hot place, which is called cosmopolitan. So that's the concept of the lifelong education, and we can find the solution in lifelong education, I firmly believe. And I would like to quote one sentence: if we walk, there will be a path. If we maintain, there will be light. This would be the anchor or advocation of all of us when we implement lifelong education. Thank you for taking your time, and thank you for organizing today's meaningful event. I would like to especially thank Chief Ho Jung-ok and other participants and the YouTube watchers too. Last but not least, I would like to thank the head of the Lifelong Education Center from 16 administrative units of Korea. Let's give us another big round of hands. Thank you.
네, 이로써 저희가 준비한
This marks the session today, at the end of the session. I would like to thank the organizers again. Let's give them a big round of hands.